So welcome, ladies and gents, to this wonderful, beautiful day of world history. It looks like it's going to be nice outside. Over the Easter break, the weekend was a little bit dreary, but it looks like we're finally picking up. So that's exciting, and I'm happy about that. Now, that being said, we're going to jump in, and we're going to talk a little bit more about World War II today. We're going to discuss a few things. We're going to take up this short week by talking about things like the Holocaust and the war in the Pacific, and get all set up that way. But before we jump in today, I want to talk about a few different things. The first thing being, I want to remind everyone where to find different things as life gets crazier as we move on. I don't know about you guys, but it really kind of set in for me over this week about just how long it's going to be before we actually get to have normal school again. So if you think about it, we are pretty much you're not going to be able to experience normal school or going back to school until you come back next year in August, which is crazy. And so it's really important that we understand and keep up with what's going on, and that we realize that life is going to get kind of wild and out of whack for a little bit because we're staying at home all the time and we have to structure our time ourselves. So a couple reminders. Make sure that you're getting your stuff done for this class by Saturday of each week, all right? I see a few of you guys turning things in on Saturdays. That's awesome. You're keeping up with your stuff. You're doing a great job. There are like probably 20 of you guys that are turning everything in on time, and I absolutely love that. You're doing fantastic. If you're not, try to work towards getting there, all right? And so we're going to work together to kind of structure and do a few different things to make sure we know what's going on. But the first thing I want to remind you guys of is that it's going to be super easy in the next month or month and a half, okay, to really get lost in chillaxing. And I've seen all the memes where online school seems optional. I also fall into that trap too. It's really easy, just us as humans, to say, okay, I really don't have to do this because I'm chilling at home, all right? However, that's not the case, and the best way to take care of ourselves mentally and physically and make sure we're getting everything done and ready to go for this class and other classes is to establish a routine. So I suggest, guys, setting yourself up for success, all right? I see a lot of us are kind of playing catch-up in a lot of different classes, and the best way to eliminate that is that if your schedule allows it, carve out a chunk of time where you just say, hey, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to get this stuff done and be productive so that I can feel like I've accomplished something today, because sometimes that's a tough thing when you're living in quarantine, right? And then spend some time outside, structure your time to where you can get to everything that you need to, all right? And if that means letting yourself sleep in till 9 and not starting school until 9 and going from like 9 to 2, that's okay. Whatever works for you, just make sure to establish that schedule and really adhere to it, because it's going to help you stay mentally with it, because I know that that's a tough thing. Even teachers are struggling with that right now, making sure that we are honed in and getting everything done for you guys. So make sure that you have that structure, you follow along. If you want help, some guidance on that, always shoot me an email, let me know what's going on, and I'd be happy to help you out setting up a schedule or whatever you need to do to make yourself successful. All right, so beyond all that stuff, we're going to start talking about World War II today, or we're going to keep talking about World War II today and kind of get to the nitty-gritty of how the Nazis backstabbed the Soviets or the Russians during all of this chaos that is World War II. And the way that we're going to do that is something that we've kind of done before, but I want to remind us how to do this. So I want everyone to be paying attention right here. I'm going to share my screen here really quick so that you can take a look at what's going on. So I'm sharing my screen here, and if you take a look on Classroom, all right, here's the announcement for today. And on Classroom, guys, I have for you the Zoom link, an agenda, all this different stuff. But if you notice, I say, hey, as we walk through class today, I have an assignment posted. And the way that you're going to finish up that assignment is it's just something for you to take notes on and follow along with what we're talking about. So if you scroll down and you find this assignment and click on it, yours looks different than mine. Yours looks like this. All right, find World War II Continued Guided Notes. You click on this right here and you open it up. That's one of your assignments for this week. You're only going to have 2 pretty short assignments for this week, but this is the assignment that you're going to use to follow along and take notes as we talk about the continuation of World War II today. So make sure you grab that. Make sure everyone gets logged in, grabs that off a Classroom, gets ready to go so you can follow along. Now, let me show you the cool thing about this guided notes. As I made these guys, I wanted it to be easy for me to see what work that you've done, but I also wanted it to be easy for you to pick out the pieces that you actually had to do. So if you take a look at this assignment, I have at the very beginning here, oh, my mouse is going crazy. At the very beginning here, I've got a couple pictures for you to look at and analyze just a little bit, and then you answer the question that I ask you right here in this box down below. Now, as we jump in and start taking notes, you'll see that all of the yellow blank spaces, those are the blanks that you have to find the answer to as we go through and take notes, and you just type the right word into each of those spots. Some of them are one word, some of them are two words. There's one that's a quick little short quote. And so you can find each of these things as we walk through our notes today and fill those out. And that way, when you turn it into me as an assignment, I can look at it and say, hey, you got all those yellow spots filled out correctly, and it's easy for us to keep track of your participation. So everyone should have access to this. Everyone should be able to get a copy of it off that assignment. Now, once we are done with our notes for today, you have one final little question that I want you to write about down here, and then you turn it in as an assignment. It's a quick, easy 20 points, done and ready to go. All right, so this is pretty simple, pretty sweet, pretty straightforward. You're just getting credit for some of the stuff that we would normally do in class. So make sure you're following along. Does anyone have any questions with where to find this or how to do any of this stuff?
Turn off your camera.
Turn off my camera? Oh, do we have someone with their camera on?
Yes.
That's illegal.
Just flip that camera button off, guys, so that we can upload this to YouTube. If you got questions, make sure to unmute your mic and let me know. But for now, right here, you have everything that you need to know, okay, for all of this stuff going on. So make sure you have that downloaded or ready to go in some way. Have it up on your Chromebook, on a separate computer, whatever you need to do to get that ready to go. Now, I've got some people that are printing things off at home because it's easier for you to do things on paper. Guys, I'm 100% flexible on that. If you want to print it off at home and fill it out, and then all you have to do is take a picture of it and email it to me, and I can grade that assignment for you. All right? As long as you are participating and demonstrating that learning in some way, I'm cool with that. All right? Just make sure that you're being responsible and getting that stuff done on time, following along, making sure you're getting the stuff that you need to know as you move forward in high school. So, without further ado, because I don't want to take too long today and make sure that we have a nice, short, concise class where we learn a lot, all right? We are going to jump in and we're going to take some notes on the continuation of World War II. But before we do that, I want to double check with everybody, all right? So if you have that guided note assignment off of Classroom ready to go to fill out as we take some notes, I want you to go down and I want you to click the little yes box, just like we've done in all our classes before, so I can make sure everyone is following along and has your stuff ready to go. I'm happy to see so many people here this morning, guys. It's good to see you.
Tristan's being whack.
Tristan, are you okay over there?
No.
His button.
Tristan's never okay, but that's all right.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What does that mean?
All right, it looks like most of us are getting it. Awesome. Make sure you have that ready to go, opened up, and following along here. All right, so without further ado, let's take some notes. So if you take a look, hold on, let me see here. I want to make sure, pardon the interruption, I want to make sure that I share my audio with you guys so that I can show you a little video as we take some notes today. All right, so now that that's ready to go, let's move on to our notes for today. All right, guys, everyone should have something to take some notes on, that assignment that you're going to fill out and turn into me. And today, we're talking about the continuation of World War II. Now, if you remember and you think back to where we left off last time, if you take a look at those two pictures on your guided notes that I've got on there today, we talked about the spread of Nazism and just how successful Nazi Germany was during the beginning of World War II. And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to paint a picture of just how crazy powerful Nazi Germany was and how they were super quick at dominating Europe. So if you take a look, today we're talking about the continuation of World War II, which means we're talking about the turn on the Soviets and the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, where the United States finally decides to get involved in World War II. And that's what this picture is of right here. It's actually a American warship in Pearl Harbor sinking below the surface. You can tell it's on fire. This is a result of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So we need to remember where we left off. So think back, guys, and this is a little section that I've got in your guided notes. So make sure to fill in these blanks. Remember that we had talked about everything leading up to this point. The Axis powers, which were at this time, right, Germany, Russia or the Soviets, Italy, and Japan, they were all together and they had really dominated Europe, especially Germany. The power that Nazi Europe had, or Nazi Germany had, was incredible. They had a huge military. Remember, they have blitzkrieg, so they have this style of warfare where it's lightning war. They just punch straight into a country and just attack with millions of soldiers. A lot of them are on meth. They're literally prescribed methamphetamine to keep them awake and fighting for hours, days on end. Things are crazy in Nazi Germany, and it translates to a lot of military success. Poland fell to the Germans. France fell to the Germans. The Balkans fell under Nazi control. So remember the Balkan powder keg? That whole area ends up really being controlled by the Nazis or the Axis powers. And we find ourselves at this point where the rest of Europe is really under Nazi control, or they're not actively fighting the Axis powers at all. And so Great Britain is actually the next country in line. Remember, right now it's only France and Great Britain that are trying to fight off the Axis powers. The United States isn't involved yet. Neither is Canada. Well, Canada's kind of involved because of their association with Great Britain, but they're not actively fighting. And so Great Britain is actually on the brink of being invaded. They're the next country on Germany's plate to go in and gobble up. In fact, they were constantly bombed. Hitler starts sending in the Luftwaffe to bomb cities like London, just relentlessly trying to soften the target, but also get the British people to kind of give up and break their spirit. Hitler then started to establish a new order of control. Guys, what he would do is just like he did in Vichy, France. Remember, we talked about how he would go in and he would start to set up these puppet governments where he would take French people and put them in charge, but they really weren't in charge. They had to listen and obey and do whatever the Nazis told them, and then they made it look like a real government. And so Hitler starts to establish this new order, that he's going to control all of this area, that he's going to rule it with an iron fist, and use all of its resources to help Nazi Germany succeed in the war effort. So, if you take a look at the map right here, guys, this is what we're left with, or this is actually what we looked at during this time. You've got Nazi Germany and kind of the area of under Axis control here at the beginning of the war. Now, by the time that we're talking about, by about the 1940 leading into 1941, France has completely fallen to Nazi Germany. The entire area of France is being controlled. All of Poland is being controlled by the Axis powers. Remember, the Soviet Union, they're allied with the Germans, with Nazi Germany. And so they attack Poland as well. Down here in the Balkans, this area is controlled by the Axis powers. Remember, Italy is allied with Germany. And so we basically have this whole huge chunk of Europe that is dominated by Hitler and his Nazi forces, which are really the leaders of the Axis powers. Now, today, we talk about something that turns the tide of this war completely. If you look at this, remember, see, Great Britain is chilling out over here. They're just trying to hold out and stay safe from Germany. Germany's constantly sending over Luftwaffe Air Force divisions to bomb the heck out of tons of cities, all right? France has fallen, and so this little gap, the English Channel, is really contentious. They're fighting there. They're trying to keep all of the enemy soldiers from crossing and coming in to attack Great Britain through a land invasion. So that's a huge concern. Now, among all of these concerns, Hitler decides to do something kind of crazy. And so I ask you this question right here. remember, and we learned this through our World War II oversimplified video. If you think back, Hitler was very vocal about a system of government that he said was the exact opposite of Nazism. He said there was Nazism, which were what everyone should be, and then there is a different system of government that is the enemy of Nazism. It's the exact opposite, and it's horrible, and it needs to be stopped. This system that Hitler was so against, if you remember, guys, was communism. He said that communism was absolutely evil, that it was wrong, that it was against the teachings of the Nazis, and so therefore it needed to be attacked, it needed to be ended, and it was the opposite of what he was actually trying to create with his worldwide empire, or whatever his national or idyllic vision was. So if you think about it, what country was strong and communist at this time? Unmute your mic and tell me if you remember. What is it?
Soviets over in Russia.
The Soviets. So if you look over here, the Soviet Union, they're a huge, strong communist country. Remember, they went through the communist revolution just at the very end of World War I. And so what happens is, even though Hitler is allied with the Soviet Union, once he takes this whole area, he decides to do something crazy. And he actually takes his forces and decides that he's going to attack the Soviet Union. And he's going to violate the pact or the alliance that they had, and he's going to try to take over this whole area. And this plan was called Operation Barbarossa. All right? Now, Barbarossa, this is actually named after a king. Barbarossa stands for Redbeard. This was named after a king back during the Crusades, actually. We talked about him a little bit, but this was the king that had his beard stepped on, and he fell off his horse, and he drowned in the little pond or the little river crossing that they were going through. I don't know if you remember that, but this is named after that idea, okay, that they're going to go in and they're going to attack the Russians. So after dominating most of Europe, Hitler sets his eyes on Russia, or the Soviet Union. Okay, at this time, they're the Soviet Union, the USSR. And so Hitler decides that he's going to invade. In fact, here's a little quote that he puts together. If I had the Ural Mountains, Siberia, and Ukraine, Germany would live or survive in plenty. That's what Hitler says, that it is his idea that he's going to step in, he's going to do whatever he can to take over this area because he wants this room for Germany. He called it Lebensraum. It means like elbow room, room to expand his Aryan race. And so he decides to go in and take what was Russia's. In June of 1941, Hitler violates the Nazi-Soviet Pact. So that was their alliance agreement. And they decide to invade, or he decides to send his army in to invade Russia. The Germans advanced quickly. The Russians were not expecting this attack from the Germans because, heck, they were allies. They hadn't had this conflict ever before, and all of a sudden, they just kind of flipped the script, and they were kind of traitors. And so the Russians weren't expecting an attack from Germany. So when the Germans attacked, they advanced super quickly. But remember, the Russians are experienced in this, guys. We talked about how, like, Napoleon, during this time period, or way before this time period, when he invaded Russia, the Russians are very well practiced in being able to retreat and being able to destroy everything that they leave behind so that the invading army doesn't get any of those resources. And they know how to fend it off. Because remember, there's something really brutal that happens in Russia every year. This whole invasion really wasn't super well planned. It was an effective operation, and there was success at first, but the Russians are really good at this, and they have a huge territory. So if you think about it, what could stop the German army? Because it had stopped Napoleon before in Russia. It is the brutal Russian winter. The horrible, snowy, cold winters were horrible. What's up, Destiny?
How many of you guys want to go marching through Sub-Zero with no supplies because the Russians left you nothing?
Exactly. I wouldn't want to, and neither did the Germans. So when they end up getting trapped in this horrible, nasty Russian winter, the German war machine really just starts to slow down. And as they start to slow down, they start setting their eyes on, instead of actually attacking and moving forward in territory, they start sieging certain cities. So sieging, you've probably heard of before, but it's where you basically cut off all the supplies to a city, you surround it, and you wait for the people inside to give up because they're basically starving to death and they can't get out of the city. So the Nazis start doing this to cities like Leningrad, which was named after Vladimir Lenin. And so all of these areas end up kind of in a weird stalemate where they're stuck in this horrible winter. The Germans aren't really advancing. The Russians are trying to take away all supplies from the Germans. And they end up sieging and putting these cities under complete kind of German oversight and control as they try to starve them out. It gets really crazy. And we're going to talk about a few of those battles in those German siege cities. They get bloody, they get horrible, and it's in the dead of winter. It's a bad time to be alive, honestly. So this was Operation Barbarossa. This is when the Nazis flipped the script. Hitler decided to invade his ally. And so all of a sudden, the Soviets are battling the Germans, just like France and Britain were before then. So we kind of see an unofficial alliance in which the Soviets almost join up with the side of the British, the French, and then eventually the United States, because they all have a common enemy in the Axis powers, because Germany has invaded Russia. This was a big mistake, honestly, and we see it kind of play out because now, if you think about it, Germany, once again, just like in World War I, has a war on two fronts. Because they decided to invade Russia, all of a sudden, they're going to have to live with the consequences of battling Russia on one side and battling France and Great Britain and the United States on the other. Now, among all of these big changes that we see in 1941, we also see at the very end of 1941, something really big happens. And you've talked about this before in American history, so we're just going to gloss over it and talk about it. So when the war began, guys, remember that the United States declared neutrality. They said they didn't want anything to do with the war. They weren't going to fight. They didn't want to get involved like in World War I. They were going to stay isolated. All right? They were going to stay isolated. Now, that works for the United States for quite a while. They unofficially support the Allies, just like they did in World War I. They send a few things. They actually pass a few laws. So in 1941, the U.S. still wasn't completely involved, but they still supported the Allies. Guys, they passed this law called the Lendlease Act, which actually allowed Congress and FDR to sell war materials or lend any type of war materials to the Allies. So the United States is actually supporting the Allied cause and sending these war materials and trying to help them out in their fight against the Axis powers, even though they are not openly involved in the war. They haven't declared war. They haven't done any of that. They're just supporting the Allies. Now, as the Lend-Lease Act kind of starts to help grow and support the Allied powers, the United States still says that they're going to stay neutral. They want to stay out of the war. They want to stay isolated. And they don't want to expend all of their energy and lose a bunch of men in this global war, just like in World War I. They'd seen that play out before, and they didn't want to do it. Now, during this time, there still wasn't any conflict. But FDR, the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, still met with Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, to arrange and agree on this thing called the Atlantic Charter, where basically the United States was going to support Great Britain in their fight against the Axis powers in Nazi Germany. There still was not a declaration of war, though. It was just kind of a silent ally thing. Then, Japan and the United States started to have these growing tensions. The U.S., during this time, because they were really associating themselves with the Allies, had decided to start cutting supplies to Japan. Because remember, guys, Japan supported the Axis powers. They were part of the Axis powers. And so the United States started to cut off their supply and their trade with Japan. And this kind of made them ticked. And so we start to see this resentment and this argument and this fight grow just a little bit. And it reaches a boiling a boiling point, on December 7th, 1941. Talks were at a standstill with Japan. Things were not going well. And then, on December 7th, 1941, there was a surprise attack at the U.S. naval base on Pearl Harbor. Now, Pearl Harbor was an area of control by the U.S. military in Hawaii. A little known fact is that at this time, guys, Hawaii wasn't even a United States state. They weren't part of the U.S. yet, but there was a Navy base there. Now, on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese sent in not only warships and battleships to start bombarding the shoreline and taking things out, but there was also an aerial assault from the Japanese Air Force. And so this surprise attack on Pearl Harbor caught everyone off guard. It was extremely deadly. And the crazy thing was, guys, is that the United States had not declared war or was not really an active part of World War II up until this point. Now, after this attack, the United States President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said one of the most famous historical quotes that you can really see today. And he called this day, December 7th, a day that will live in infamy. And the reason why he said this is because 2,400 or 2,400 American soldiers died. I think 10 or 12 American battleships were either sunk or severely, severely damaged. There were hundreds, even thousands of planes or aircraft that were damaged during this attack. So it was something that not only was really unprovoked, but it was a surprise and an act of war when the United States hadn't declared war yet. And so this is what really brings the United States into this conflict. All right, we see that the United States remains neutral all the way up until 1941. And at the end of that year, after Pearl Harbor, the United States declares war, not only on Japan, but eventually they declare war on all of the Axis powers, and they get involved in World War II. So to give us a little perspective here, I've got a quick video that is used to describe some of the things that went on during this attack in Pearl Harbor. It's pretty cool. It's got a lot of good information. And these are real men that survived the attack, real veterans that are talking about their experiences. So let's take a look and a listen here.
On December 7th, 1941, the world changed.
Very quickly you realized that this was a normal situation. The Japanese was attacking Pearl Harbor.
The air was filled with all kinds of smoke and debris. The noise was unbearable.
The planes were so thick, looked like they might fly into one another even.
The Japanese had everything planned. They were after the battleships and the aircraft, and that's what they got.
There was a total of 44 torpedoes dropped that morning. Inside of 20 minutes, the Oklahoma was over on her side.
We took the sight cap off the periscope. Bam! There went the Arizona.
The second attack was an hour and 15 minutes later of 167 aircraft. It was a sight I'll never forget. I watched the Arizona, the West Virginia, the Tennessee, the Nevada, California, Utah, all engulfed in smoke and flames and all sinking.
It was chaotic. Guys hollered for their lives.
Oil from the destroyer came on top of the water, caught fire, so it had flames all around us.
The fire from the Arizona was so intense. These guys that fell over, came up, got the film on their bodies, were like human torches.
The fireball went about 800 feet in the air and just enveloped us. I got burned over about 65% or 70% of my body.
We seen men jumping off the ship into boiling oil and water, trying to make it to the beach.
There was a body in the water. When I pulled the guy's arm, it came off. Well, of course, that scared the living daylights out of me. I saw these bodies lying around. So the first one, I turned him over, and the back of his head was missing. I wasn't prepared for that.
I still, to this day, had memories of bodies we pulled out of the bay, but all of them was oil soaked, and it left a real bad memory.
Tears came to my eyes because of the destruction of the ships and more important, the lives that were lost.
This December the 7th, we will be celebrating our 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor.
For the 75th, this will be a biggie. I didn't think I'd be around. I figured I was on borrowed time from December 7th on.
I feel very fortunate to survive Pearl Harbor. So many guys didn't.
I get tears even when I think about it, because there were a lot of them that didn't make it.
And I realize we represent others who can't make it. We're the few that's left.
There are not very many Pearl Harbor survivors left that can tell that horrible story of that particular day.
This will probably be the last big celebration. Most of us will probably be gone.
I'm serving the people that died already by telling the people what they did, what they died for.
I can still see the planes coming across. I can still see the battleships blowing up. I think it'll remain with me till the day I die.
There's so much anger when you're under attack. I feel differently in that I've forgiven everybody that was involved on both sides of the war.
I hated them because it was nonsense for them to do the things they did. But things happen, you can't do nothing about them. They already passed and gone.
I was kind of angry with them at first, but you know, it's been so many years since that happened. I'm not angry no more at anybody.
I just like to shake hands and make friends, and be friends with one another. Just want peace.
Were enemies once, best friends now. I think about the future. I don't think about what happened in the past. You can't change what's happened. I'm not fighting the war now. I'm thinking about the future.
So guys, there's a little video to just kind of give you some perspective on the attack on Pearl Harbor. This, I believe, was made back in 2015, which would have been the 75th, I think, for Pearl Harbor. And so it was a big thing that the United States experienced. There had never been a real attack like that on American soil since probably maybe the Spanish-American War, but nothing of that magnitude. Nothing that claimed that many lives or that much property or did that much devastation. And so there was a huge impact on this, on the American people and the soldiers that were there from the attack on Pearl Harbor. You can see that. In fact, you can still go to Pearl Harbor today and you can visit. If you saw that shot there at the end, there was kind of that white bridge over the top of a sunken ship. I believe that's the USS Arizona. You can still go visit it today. And walk over the bridge and look down and see the sunken ship. It left a huge impression on the U.S. And this is when the United States decides to get involved in World War II, which marks a huge change in what starts to happen. So let's finish up by talking about the nitty-gritty of that attack. We call this the day that will live in infamy. Guys, 2,400 people lost their lives that day in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Battleships and aircraft were destroyed. Like you heard the veterans say in that video, the Japanese had specifically targeted the battleships and the airfield so they could do as much damage to the American fleet and the American Air Force as possible. Guys, this attack on the United States would prove to be one of the biggest mistakes ever made by the Axis powers, mostly Japan. And the reason why we say that is because, really, until the United States gets involved in the war in 1941, the Allies, which at this time were really just Great Britain and France, they were on the brink of losing this war. Japan was doing whatever they wanted by attacking China. They also had the ability to attack Russia through China. So the Axis powers were really on the brink of complete and total success. They had absolute control of most of mainland Europe. They were about to invade Great Britain. The Japanese had complete and total control of whatever they wanted to do in the Pacific, okay, and whatever they wanted to do in China. Things were going really well for the Axis powers up until this point. When the United States started to get involved, that's where we see the tide of war start to turn just a little bit. Now, it wasn't like the United States gets involved and all of a sudden, boom, the war is just completely turned the other way and the Allies start winning. That's not the case at all. but the entrance of the United States into World War I really does help to change the mood and start that climb back to success that the Allies have to eventually win World War II. So overall, Japan kind of makes one of the most costly mistakes that they can by attacking Pearl Harbor, especially when the United States wasn't even involved in the war at the time. So this is when we see the start of the war in the Pacific. And this is the last thing that you have on your notes there for today, guys. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor marked the beginning of the war in the Pacific. If you think about this, World War II, guys, is really fought in two theaters. We call them theaters of war, all right? Now, the first theater is in Europe, the European theater. That's where Great Britain and France and eventually the United States come in, and they're battling Nazi Germany and Italy and a bunch of different places there in Europe. And then we have what we call the Pacific theater, and that's kind of around the globe in the Pacific Ocean. This is where the United States really fights the Japanese as they try to hop through the Pacific Islands and take over bit by bit so that they can try to beat back the Japanese advance through the Pacific. What you should know, guys, is that Japan, after they make this war attack on Pearl Harbor, they strike early, they strike fast, and they have a lot of victories there at the beginning. They capture tons of islands that were previously held by the Allies. They treat a lot of the people that are there super horribly. A lot of the areas around there end up being controlled by the Japanese as they really buckle down and they start to control the people on these Pacific Islands. And they're notorious for their brutal control of these people. But that's what brings us to the start of the war in the Pacific and where we see the two theaters of war in World War II. So if you've got all of your blanks here for the start of the war in the Pacific, then we are done with our notes there for today.
I didn't get the answer for what system of government did Hitler view as the opposite of Nazism.
So, see you later. So we talked about how when Hitler decides to invade the Soviets, he invades them because not only does he want their territory, but he saw communism as the enemy. Okay? So communism is opposite of Nazism. So guys, I know we went a little long today, but you got all your information. If you followed along and got these, make sure to answer your 2 questions and then turn that assignment into me. Remember, it's due on Saturday, but you can always turn it in. What's up, Celeste?
Bye.
See you later. All right, guys, stick around if you have any questions, but other than that, we're good and done for today. I'll see you tomorrow at 11.